I have a question for every team in the wild, wild Western Conference of the NBA. Some would say it's the best conference. Regardless of what you want to call it, let's get into it. I do want to start this show by saying thank you for the support. It's been crazy as of late. Of course, a lot of content is pumping out on the channel. So if you enjoyed today's show, consider dropping a like and supporting the channel down below. Most importantly, it is turning on that bell notifications. We upload every single day at noon, practically. Let's get into it here. The number one seed in the Western Conference last year, one of the most fun teams to watch, if I do want to add on to that, is the Oklahoma City Thunder. And my question for them, are they actually ready to take that next step? Last year, youngest number one seed in NBA history, make it to the second round of the playoffs. And if they didn't run into a man on a mission, they probably would have made it to the Western Conference Finals. And who knows what could have happened there. But the Thunder, of course, they made some crazy offseason acquisitions, bringing in Alex Caruso, bringing in Isaiah Hartenstein. They've only added on to the depth of this team around their young superstar guard in gilgeous-alexander, and you still have so much potential on this team to get better, right? You bring J-Dub could take a step up to an all-star guy, which is my player to watch. Chet is in that conversation as well. I still think there's some other guys on the team that could also take a step up to be better. This team is amazing, right? And they're so deep, right? As far as their roster construction, they have the star talent, the depth around them, and it's just a perfectly built team. They also have the coach to run it all. So my question for them is, sure, they're going to be a good regular season team yet again, but are they ready to knock down the Lukas of the world in the playoffs, the Jokic's of the world in the playoffs, the Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves? Are they ready to make a deep playoff run to actually get to the NBA Finals, or are they just going to be another great regular season team like the Jazz years ago, where they're good, just not great as far as when it matters most? My player to watch, though, is Jalen Williams. Of course, last year broke out. Crazy improvements across the board on the statistical side of the game. 19 points, 4 assists a game on good efficiency. And the Thunder, I think, to actually be a legitimate contender and to make a legitimate case to go out there and beat these top-end dogs in the Western Conference, they're going to need that secondary elite score, a guy like Jalen Williams, to give them, let's say, 20 to 21 points a night. Not a major improvement, but just well-round his game. And of course, give you that 20 points a night. I think that's going to give them an elite. I think Jalen Williams is going to have to be that guy to take that step up, to give them 20 and well-round his game out, just in case Shea doesn't have it going, or if he's in foul trouble, or whatever the case is. They're going to need that secondary elite score on a nightly basis, especially in April, right? Starting in April all the way to June. They're going to need that secondary guy. So I think J-Dub can be that guy, and I'm excited to see if he can jump up to be an all-star next season. For the Denver Nuggets, who's going to step up? You lost KCP this offseason, a guy that's been a consistent player for you the last 4 to 5 years, let's say. And you lose them for practically nothing this offseason. So now you go into this year addressing pretty much none of your issues from last year, which was the depth and the overall, I guess, quality players on this roster. Players that are ready to win now, let's say that. And you didn't really address that. In fact, you probably got worse. Now you're running out of lineup with Christian Braun, who was a six-man last year, and he wasn't a great bench player. He's going to be considered to be the starter at the two-guard position this season. Now, on the bench, you're going to be relying on guys like Peyton Watson and now newly acquired Russell Westbrook to keep this team afloat when Jokic hits the bench. Now, last year, this Nuggets team reminded me of the 2017-2018 Cavalier teams. I'm a Cavs fan, and whenever LeBron would hit the bench, when he would take a step off of the court, the team would go down 15 points. And then when LeBron came back, he would have to save the day. That's what it seemed like for the Denver Nuggets last season. And honestly, I think it's going to be the same this year. I think after this year, they're going to be forced to make a big acquisition. Of course, they just extended Jamal Murray, so he's there to stay. But do we trade Michael Porter? Do we trade some draft picks down the line to grab another piece that can help us win right now? Because our window is open now as far as contending for championships. But my player to watch is Russell Westbrook, of course. You bring him in. I think he's going to be the guard version of Aaron Gordon. When Aaron Gordon's not on the court, Russell Westbrook's going to be in the dunker spot. He's going to be just a guard version of AG. And I think it's going to be pretty fun to watch, especially because Jokic being this big, tall center, I guess running the offense. And then you got this 6'3" athletic point guard just sitting in the paint, where it's reversed throughout the history of basketball. But also, of course, when AG is on the court, Westbrook this whole season is just going to be getting wide open three after wide open three. Teams are going to be forcing him to knock down that shot consistently. And if he can't, he's going to be taken off the court for the Denver Nuggets because they need that spacing around their core guys. And if Russell can't bring that, well, he's going to have to be an amazing defender at the bare minimum. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, was last year a fluke? Of course, last year Vegas projected them to barely be a play-in team, and then they go out there and they're fighting for the top seed all season. Last couple weeks of the year, they had some injuries. Regardless, they fall down to the 3 seed in the Western Conference. But that didn't stop them. They go into the playoffs. They win. Of course, they sweep Anthony Edwards' idol, a role model, and Kevin Durant in the first round. They go to the second round. They beat the reigning NBA champions. And I understand it went to 7, but that series was just so dominant for the Minnesota Timberwolves. It didn't feel like a 7-game series. It felt like a gentleman's sweep. It felt like the Timberwolves just had control of it the entire way. And they went on to, of course, the Western Conference Finals. And that, a couple shots down the stretch of those games, and they could have been in the NBA Finals. But for going into next year, I think my player to watch is Anthony Edwards. And I try and stay away from the best player or best players on these teams. But Anthony Edwards is going to be the guy to watch for me for Minnesota this year. He last year took a big step up, right, into superstardom, some would say. But this year, I think he could take another step. I think he could be one of those top 5 guys in the league after next season. He looked great for Team USA. At times, he looked like their go-to scorer off the bench, which is crazy to say on a team of Steph Curry, LeBron, Kevin Durant. We know who was there. Anthony Edwards was the guy at some points in time throughout that Olympic gold medal run. But excited to see what he can do. Excited to see if he could take like an MVP leap this year, especially if they win, let's say, 50 to 60 games. For the Dallas Mavericks, they shocked the world and made the NBA Finals last year. Who predicted that? You're looking at them. You're listening to them. I predicted they were going to make the NBA Finals before the season. Don't believe me? Check my TikTok. Of course, check the channel from last year. I had this team going all the way to the NBA Finals and losing to the Boston Celtics. One of the few crazy further down the line predictions I've made, but I'm going to take my, of course, flowers when I can get them. But for the Dallas Mavericks, you needed shooting. You lost Derrick Jones Jr. this offseason, and you bring in arguably a top 5 shooter ever in Klay Thompson, a guy that you bring in on a relatively cheap deal. 3 years, $50 million is nothing in today's NBA. And I think this is a guy that's going to have the most open looks of his career ever. Coming off the down seasons in Golden State the last 2 years, coming off some of those injuries, he's lost a step. Some people don't view him the same. But as we saw last year, there was times where he was left open for the Golden State Warriors, as crazy as that sounds, being arguably the second best shooter of all time. But I think when you're around Kyrie, when you're around Luka Doncic, right, 2 guys that just command so much attention, it's going to be, you have to pick and choose what you want to do. And I think I would rather double Luka Doncic when he's got it going than, just to play him one-on-one. So is Klay the guy they peel off? Or is it PJ Washington, who took a big step up with his shot last year? This Dallas Mavericks team is going to be ready to go. And I think they're going to make another run. I just don't think they're going to make it to the NBA Finals. But I think Klay Thompson is overhated, and I think he's underappreciated. I just think that, there had to be a scapegoat for these Golden State Warriors teams, and they instantly went to Klay Thompson, even though we've seen the biggest problem with Team USA, and that correlates a lot to Golden State. Maybe it's a head coach that I'm talking about. But I don't think Klay was the sole problem. I don't think he's going to be a huge addition for the Dallas Mavericks. But the question, of course, can Klay splash back? Thought that was kind of ironic, kind of funny, whatever. For the Clippers, what if this doesn't work again? You re-sign James Harden, big deal. Paul George is no longer, right? He left for practically nothing to the Philadelphia 76ers. And you've had to revamp this team. You bring in a lot of crazy depth pieces. This team might be the deepest it's ever been around Kawhi Leonard. But of course, there's questions around Kawhi's health, around James Harden's consistencies, right? Can you trust him in those big moments? Can you trust that Kawhi gets to that point late in the year? Some big questions for the LA Clippers, but I think they have a top three coach in the league in Tyronn Lue. But my player to watch is going to be Kevin Porter Jr. As a Cavs fan, I loved him when he was here in Cleveland. Is he necessarily a player that you would want to play with if you were an NBA player? No, right? Because he does have the tendencies of being a ball hog. But his last game was in April of 2023. Of course, he got suspended for last season. But the last year he was playing, he had a stretch second half of the year where he was averaging 19, 6, and 5 on okay efficiency. I think if he can bring a Malik Monk kind of a vibe, right, and impact to this LA Clippers team, just being elite six man, I think it's going to do wonders for his career and, of course, for the LA Clippers. The nastiest part about it, though, he's wearing number 77. That just doesn't sit right with me on Kevin Porter Jr., but excited to see him return to basketball. For the Suns, can we maximize this big three? And how do we maximize this big three? After they got swept last year, of course, the owner, Matt Ishbia, came out to the podium. James Jones, the GM, they made it sound like there's nothing wrong with being swept, of course, in the fashion that they were. And of course, we all know that's not the case. We all know that some changes needed to happen, and they didn't this offseason. So now they're going to make a head coaching change with Mike Budenholzer coming in, and they're going to just expect him to fix this big three and to maximize them. Can it happen? I'm sure it can. But I think Mike Budenholzer is the same exact coach as the one they just had, as far as his stubbornness and, of course, just sticking to his philosophy that he's had for years, and it's never been proven to win a championship. Of course, the one year he had Giannis, and I understand, right? He got lucky the one year in 2021. But I think he has a big challenge ahead of him here in Phoenix. And can he maximize this big three? I don't know. To me, I think the way to maximize them is to bring Bradley Beal off the bench. I've been saying that for months now, saying that since the middle of last season. I think, again, being a bench player doesn't mean you can't get your minutes. I think him starting the game on the bench, let's say the first 5 minutes of the game, you have Tyus Jones in the starting lineup instead of Bradley Beal. You can have Bradley Beal, or I'll say this, Tyus Jones being the elite playmaker that he is, and he is my player to watch for them. Of course, he's the only guy to lead the NBA in assist to turnover ratio every single year of his career so far, right? But I think if he starts the game, he can get Devin Booker in his spots and get him going. Kevin Durant, same thing. Get this offense in a groove. And then when, one of those guys gets in foul trouble or one of them slows down a little bit, then you insert Bradley Beal into this offense and he's an instant bucket. I think that's the absolute best way that you can maximize this big three. Bradley Beal can still play 30 plus minutes a night. He just won't start the game, if that makes any sense. But the player to watch, of course, Tyus Jones. Got him on a cheap deal. He's exactly what this team needs. But how can Mike Budenholzer utilize him to help open up this offense and let this offense flow to the best that it can, right? That's the big question. For the Lakers, can we find consistency? You have your star players. We saw for Team USA, they still have that second and third gear. They can still, carry a team to win at a high level. LeBron, of course, 40 years old. It's not going to get easier for him. Anthony Davis, he's an elite player, but you need help and consistency around him. This team was great second half of the year. Got to the playoffs, and you had D'Lo either giving you 18 a night or 0 of 18 every single night. And that could be said for a lot of the players down the roster when you look at how they played when it mattered most. Now, I think a player to watch for me is going to be a guy like Dalton Knecht. Again, Bronny's getting all the hype, being the rookie that the Lakers brought in. But the rookie that should be getting the hype is Dalton Knecht. Of course, knockdown shooter and just elite shot creator at Tennessee. He fell in the draft because of his age. But that's a good thing for the Lakers. They need players to win now, right? So you bring in a guy that shot 40% on 8 attempts from 3 last year for Tennessee. And, of course, he had a great March Madness run in his own right. But I think he could just be a secondary shot creator for this team. I think he could be a kind of like basically a bench version of Austin Reeves on a nightly basis. So just to get another one of those guys, but he buys into the defensive end of the court a little bit more, I think it's going to be huge for the Lakers. But other guys, of course, D'Angelo Russell, is he going to play there next year? And if he does, Can he stay consistent when it matters most? Austin Reeves, same thing. Jared Vanderbilt, Rui Hachimura. Again, you could say the same thing for a lot of the guys down the roster. For the Pelicans, the lack of center play, is that going to hurt us down the stretch of the year? Of course, you lost Jonas Valanciunas in the offseason for practically nothing, and now your centers are Zion and the rookie Yves Messi. All right, if I'm not mispronouncing his name, please let me know in the comments. The other thing is Zion's health. Can he be healthy when it matters most? Of course, I ranked him as a top 20, top 25 player just a few weeks back. What we saw in that play-in was just pure dominance. That's who they drafted him to be. A guy that his play style is not going to be, let me get into my bag and shoot a sidestep three. That's never going to be Zion. But what we saw against the Lakers in that play-in game showed us the reason why he was drafted number one. Right? Zion is an amazing talent, and he just needs to be healthy and put it all together. I worry about his health, of course, but outside of that, if he's playing the center position this year, how is his body going to hold up? Because you also traded away Larry Nance to bring in a guy like DeJounte Murray. So who's going to be the center for the Pelicans? I can tell you this right now. It's not going to go well if you have Zion being your center for the entire season. You'll make the playoffs, but that's pretty much it. I think that's their ceiling if Zion is your true center from day one of the NBA season all the way to the end of it. But the player to watch for me is going to be Trey Murphy, because if they do decide to run Zion at center, they're going to need the best possible shooting that they can have. Now, I could have went with Brandon Ingram here, the way that he ended the season very poorly. CJ McCollum, same thing. He ended the year poorly. I am excited to see DeJounte Murray in a new scenery here in New Orleans. But I think Trey Murphy, big fan of his game, right? If I could take him on the Cavs, I would in a heartbeat. But he gave him 15 points on 40% from three last year on a lot of volume. So this is a guy that's going to have to provide much needed shooting next to guys like DeJounte and Zion and Brandon Ingram, who are most notably mid-range killers. You're going to need that outside threat, and Trey Murphy's going to have to do that. As crazy as it sounds, if Zion is your starting center, Trey Murphy's going to have to shoot 45% from three this year on as many attempts that he gets a game. He's going to have to go up to 45% for that team to be as dominant as they want to be with Zion running the five. For the Sacramento Kings, they had a busy offseason, but most notably, you bring in a guy like DeMar DeRozan. So now you have three guys that primarily work in the mid-range: Sabonis, Fox, and of course, a guy like DeMar DeRozan. How much is going to be sacrificed in this offense, and who will sacrifice, and how much of their workload will they sacrifice? The question is sacrifice. I guess that's the statement, the word about the Kings this season. I'm curious to see how that operates, and they are going to be one of the teams that I go out of my way to watch on the East Coast for one of these late night games to start the year. But for the Kings, my player to watch is De'Aaron Fox. Now, again, I try and stay away from the top end guy of each team, but he is the guy that I think is going to have to be the one to sacrifice. I think this offense operates best when Sabonis has the ball, and they operate like a Denver Nugget offense, where Sabonis controls it all, it runs through him, and there's a lot of pick and roll action with some of the people around him. I think that's how this offense operates the best, and I think that's going to continue to be that way going into next season. So for Sabonis to be the point guard of this team to facilitate the offense, you're going to need some shooting around him. And of course, De'Aaron Fox can run it at times, but I think DeMar DeRozan has shown in his career he's going to shoot, he's going to stay in the mid-range. And I think you're going to need, outside of Keegan Murray, that other elite threat from the outside to open up the game for Sabonis to run the show and for DeMar to do his work in the mid-range. You're going to need that other reliable outside shooter. And I think that's going to have to be De'Aaron Fox. Of course, for his career, it's only about 33.5%. We know last year there were some nights where he would make 6, 7, 8 threes on certain nights. We need to see that, but just more consistently, right? So give us 4 threes a game, De'Aaron Fox. Give us 3 threes a game, of course, on 7 to 8 attempts a game. Just give us that reliable threat from the outside, so when it gets to the playoff time, they can't just leave you open, right? They can't just double team DeMar DeRozan and Domantas Sabonis, right? You're gonna be able to sit in the corner on the wing, and you're gonna provide a lot of spacing for this offense to operate at a high level. So again, I think guys that are going to have to sacrifice are going to have to be De'Aaron Fox and Keegan Murray. But I think if they can sit on the outside and provide that spacing, they're going to be the true MVPs of this team. Even though I'm a Sabonis fan, that's going to be the case, because those are going to be the guys that provide that much needed shooting, especially because of how fast paced Mike Brown likes to run his offenses. But for De'Aaron Fox, I'm looking for him to be swiper at a next level. If he takes this backseat offensively, I want to see him more bought in than ever. Defensively, I want to see him get, another steal and a half a game, right? I want to see him, on the deep analytics side of the game, I want to see him be the best he's ever been. And of course, he could be a sneaky all-star candidate this season. Excited to see what Fox can do in this new Kings era. For the Warriors, the roster is deeper. So will this deeper roster lead us back to where we want to be, which is the playoffs at the end of the day, to give Steph Curry a chance? The player to watch, and of course, Bakari, a co-host that sometimes on this channel, is a big fan of this guy. But Jonathan Kuminga, he took a huge jump last year, 16-5 on 53% from the field. He will need to take another step for this team to contend, I believe, right? Of course, you lost Klay Thompson, but outside of that, you had a pretty good offseason. And of course, guys like Andrew Wiggins are coming back healthy. And of course, when you look down the roster is going to be healthy to start the year, but you still need that secondary guy to spell Steph Curry when he's getting double or triple teamed on certain possessions. I think often that's going to be the strategy to make the players around Golden State beat us outside of Stephen Curry. And Jonathan Kuminga is going to be the guy that's going to be looked at to take that next step. So I'm excited to see what he can do and if this deeper roster can lead them back to the playoffs. For the Rockets, I want to see, can we get a breakout year from Jabari Smith Jr.? Of course, we know Jalen Green showed flashes last year. Sengun, they have solidified themselves as the 1A, 1B of this franchise going forward. Now we need that third guy, right? Just like Denver when they had Michael Porter finally find his groove and his footing in the league and take that step up to be elite, right? At least at his craft. That's what the Rockets need from a guy like Jabari Smith. We need that outside guy, right? We need that outside shooter, that outside creator, that third, that secondary shot creator in this offense when either Sengun or Jalen Green don't have it going. And I'm still a believer in Jabari Smith. Of course, last year, 14-8, giving you about 36% from three. I think he is a guy that could be a most improved player candidate this season, and excited to see if he can continue to improve. But that's my thing, man. Can they get a breakout from Jabari Smith? Ime is great at developing talent. Excited to see if he can do it for Jabari. For the Utah Jazz, do we trade Colin Sexton? You have a lot of guys here on this roster that are young, and they're going to need playing time. And I think this is a team that's going to be playing a lot bigger, right, than the most teams around the association. But the reason I say, do we trade Sexton, is because of Keontae George last year. Second half, of course, he had a second half breakout last season. Of course, rookie out of Baylor. And he gave you about 13 and 4.5. If you look at his second half of the year alone, he was giving up about 16 and 7 a night. So it's Keontae George. There's not much around him second half of the year last year, granted. But he has a lot more talent around him this year, bringing in guys like Kyle Flipkowski, of course, out of Duke, just to name one guy. But Laurie is extended. You still have Walker Kessler coming back from injury. I think maybe, do we trade Sexton to get a future first round pick from a team, like the Bucks, for example, or the Nuggets, right? A team that could use Sexton. Or do we just continue to bring in young talent and continue to build around guys like Larry Markkinen and Keontae George and Kessler and et cetera, et cetera? Just a question here this season. I like Colin Sexton. Of course, he was a Cavalier at one point in time. But do we trade him? That's the question this year because he's due for a big contract. For the Grizzlies, boom or bust. This is a team that I believe is on their revenge tour. And I don't understand why the hype or the hate is around the Memphis Grizzlies this offseason. A couple years ago, they were a consistent 1-3 seed, for a 2 to 3 year stretch before Ja had this suspension. And last year, when Ja came back after being off of basketball for a year, he won like what did he play for 8 games? I think he won like 5 of those games. Regardless, when Ja's on this court, this team wins at a high level, right? And now you're getting your full team healthy. Brandon Clark's healthy. Jaren Jackson's coming back. Marcus Smart's going to be healthy to start the year. Desmond Bane, I think, is the most underrated player in the league. He's coming back to be an elite outside threat for this team. Now, the bench, I worry about a little bit, right? But you brought in Zach Edey. You still have Santi Aldama, who was crazy in the world or in the Olympics. You have a lot of pieces on this team. I think they're either going to be a team that wins 55 games and be, in their top 4 seed, or I think they're a team that's going to struggle to find their footing early in the year, and they're going to be a play-in team at the end of the season. But I think this is a team that can legitimately be a top 3 seed, and I'm going to predict that here in a couple weeks for the Memphis Grizzlies. I believe in them a lot this year, but of course, Ja Morant, is there an MVP season brewing, right? Is he a sleeping giant in this MVP race? Something to look out for. For the Spurs, will there be any minute restrictions on Wemby this season? Last year, he was second in Defensive Player of the Year voting. He was the Rookie of the Year, right? Again, second in DPOY as a rookie. That doesn't usually happen. And he was on a minute restriction, averaging almost four blocks a game. His stocks were at 4.8. Wemby, one of the most dominant rookie seasons we've ever seen. And I think this is a guy that if there's no minute restrictions on him this year, he could be in to win the Defensive Player of the Year. I know all the fans want to see it. The media wants to see it. And that would be a good selling point for the NBA. Even if someone deserves it probably a little bit more, you could probably sway that, taking into account the media side of things, give the award to Wemby. Not that he needs that much help. But I think this is a guy that is absolutely insane. He's on the trajectory to be the GOAT, right? Or he has the potential to be in that conversation. And as a rookie, after 1 year, he was already a top 25 player in my top 50 rankings just a few weeks ago. So shout out to Wemby, right? I just wonder, is there going to be a minute restriction? And if there is, how different is it going to be from last year? And if it's the same minute restriction from last year, can he be more effective in those minutes, especially on the offensive side of the ball? For the Trailblazers, how patient will we be? You have such a young team, right? You have Scoot, Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant. He's getting up there in age, but DeAndre Ayton. You brought in Klingon, of course, in the draft. And I'm missing a lot of pieces here off the top of my head, but you brought in a guy also like, of course, Denny Abdia. You have so many young and talented pieces on this roster, but how patient are we going to be? Can we withstand another year of Chauncey Billups winning 15 to 20 games, right? Is that something that's we're looking, we're going to deal with, or we're going to, accept as the Trailblazers front office another season of? Are we going to accept another year of just pure misery for our fan bases? That's something to look out for, right? But how patient will we be, right? Do we get aggressive and trade away Jeremy Grant when something goes wrong, or do we keep him as a veteran mouthpiece? Do we trade away DeAndre Ayton, or do we just go and bench him? There's so many young pieces and a lot of players that need minutes, and a lot of people need to grow into their own, most notably a guy like Scoot Henderson. But how patient will we be with this super young group and then this mediocre young group? Guys like, Anthony and Jeremy Grant, guys that are getting up there, but they're due for contracts, and you're going to have to trade them, or of course, pay them here in the coming years. Just something to look out for. DeAndre Ayton is in that group as well. But how patient will we be? That's the big question for the Trailblazers. But again, bringing in a guy like Denny is huge. Of course, he averaged 15, 7, and 4. Loved his game last year. He's going to give them a good shooter on the outside, but also a secondary creator when this team needs it. But that's going to do it here. Of course, we ran through all 15 teams in the Western Conference. Last week, we did the East. Now, I do want to continue this conference deep dive, right? Next week, I wanted to bring a new series to the channel where it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. And shout out to Joel Klatt for this one and this idea. But I believe I wanted to define success for every single team. Whether if it's making it to the play-in, whether if that's just doubling your wins from last year in the case of the Detroit Pistons. I want to define success for every team the next 2 weeks. Should be tons of fun as we ramp up towards the 2024-2025 NBA season. But that's episode 207. If you made it to this point, you enjoyed a little bit, so consider dropping a like, turning the notifications on, and supporting the channel down below. But let me know what you think in the comments. And until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, get out of here.